A little while ago, I drafted this fun t-shirt dress, and today I'm super excited to be putting it together. Hi, I'm Christina, and I love to digitally apparel pattern, creating unique pieces of wearable art. And I'm super excited to get this shirt dress made. If you missed the video when I drafted it, make sure you go and check that out because it is really fun to see how you can draft patterns in Adobe Illustrator. So let's get started. The first thing I decided to do is I'm actually going to project this pattern out onto my projector. And I want to make sure that I can plan where the pattern is going to land on the front of my dress. I might not have enough to do it on the back. Once I get my projector set up and everything, we'll see if I'm going to reflect it on the back or not. But I know for sure on the front, I'm going to want to reflect this pattern piece over. So I know, oh, we can get rid of those guidelines. I know for sure that I want to reflect this pattern over this line, and then I can exactly place where I want all the different pieces of the fabric design placed on this. And I think that's going to help me make sure that it looks really, really good. So now that I have that reflected over, I love being able to pull up my PDF pattern in Adobe Illustrator and quickly do a quick manipulation, and then I'll be able to project it out and with no extra having to tape and recut more fabric or anything. I can just project it out and go. So let's get this projector set up and make sure it is scaled correctly and get sewing. Well, get cutting and then get sewing. Let's go. I'm going to bring up my projector. The first thing I need to do is bring up my inch by inch squares to make sure I am good. I'm also going to resize it down to the correct size so that I am actually cutting out the correct size of garment. I have a little note on my computer and it always ends up being very similar to that. Next, I'm actually going to bring my pattern in. And as I was looking at this, I realized I actually don't have seam allowance added onto my patterns yet. So if I were to just cut them out as is, there would not be enough seam allowance and it would be super tight. So I'm actually going to have to go in really quickly and fix this. So we're going to add some seam allowance. So what I'm going to do to add the seam allowance is I'm actually going to cut my patterns apart from each other, or I'm going to cut my patterns down that center front line and get rid of that center front line completely. And then I'm going to go back and rejoin my patterns at that center front neck and at the center front bottom. Then I'm going to go to offset path. I'm going to offset it 3/8 of an inch, and bam, super fast, super easy. I love how fast it is to add seam allowance in Adobe Illustrator, creating beautiful patterns super fast. And now that I have the seam allowance added onto the front, I'm going to go ahead and pull my fabric out and start arranging where I want it to be cut out from. And I want to make sure I'm going in the right direction. This fabric doesn't quite have a direction, but it kind of does. So I wanted to make sure that I didn't have half the words upside down and weird. You want to make sure that if there is a direction that you're cutting it out in the correct direction. Once I was all happy, had it laid out, I just started cutting out my front. And I really enjoy how fast it is to cut out these pieces with a projector and a rotary cutter. And now it's on to the back, so I'm going to move my pattern over and just get my fabric kind of laid out before I move forward. And then I'm going to do the same thing to the back. So I need to add seam allowance. I have plenty of fabric. I forgot how wide this fabric was. So I have plenty of fabric. So I'm going to double this one first. So I'm going to reflect it over that center line. And then I'm going to cut the two patterns apart so that that center front or that center back line is gone. And then I'm going to reattach them all together by joining them so my pattern's whole. And then I'm going to go to offset path And again, take it 3/8 of an inch off and it's done and happy. There we go. Then all I will have to do is just slightly arrange it so that it's nice on my fitting on my fabric, and I'm going to cut it out. I definitely need to get a bigger rotary board because I right now have 2 put together, and that causes just like a 1/8 of an inch that won't get cut in between the boards, which and knits and everything, it doesn't cause too much of a problem. But I'm definitely dreaming of when I have a big rotary board to use. Now I am on to the facings. So I'm going to lay my fabric out one more time and just take kind of a look at where I want to put those facings. I'm going to have to do the same thing to the facings. Because I didn't prep everything very well, you're watching me do this as I'm actually cutting it out. But it's also really handy of how quick it can happen. So we're going to reflect it over the center front or center back. We're going to cut that center front or center back line out. And then we're going to rejoin it and then offset the path 3/8 of an inch. Now that I have them prepped and ready, I'm going to fully lay out my fabric and start looking at where I'm going to put these patterns on this. It's going to be all on the inside, so it doesn't matter. So I'm just going to kind of go in one of the in an area of the fabric where I won't be, I'll be taking up the least amount of fabric as I can. Once I have them lined up, I'm going to cut them out. And finally, it is the sleeve. Now, I could do the sleeves one by one and really get them exactly where I want the pattern to show on the sleeve, but I didn't really want to do that. But I did notice the first time I laid it out, I wasn't happy with where the layout was. So I decided to go to the opposite side of the fabric and see if somewhere along there I could get the word adventure right in the middle of my sleeve. And I could. It worked out beautifully. So it's very nice when you have a pattern like this, if you can plan where the words are or where a particular picture is, that really makes or breaks your garments. So I always suggest bold patterns, plan out where you want your words or where you want those pictures. And there we go. I now have all of my pieces cut out and it's time to get them together. So I'm going to serge the 2 shoulder seams. Line up at the neckline and serge out to the armscye on both. Next, I'm going to serge my facings together. Again, line up at the neckline and serge outwards. Next, I'm going to serge my sleeve in. So I am going to line up the underarms to the side seam and serge all the way around the top, back down to the other side seam and underarm. And I'm going to do that on both sides. So right now I have a front and my 2 sleeves and a back. My side seams are not sewn because it's going to be easier to get in there to finish my neckline. There we go. Now that they're done, I'm going to move over to the iron and I'm going to give my facings a press open so that those shoulder seams are nice and crisp. Then I'm going to pin on the facings. So I'm going to line up my shoulder seams, line up the center front and the center back, and I'm going to pin it all the way around so that it won't move on me when I'm sewing it. Then I'm just going to sew 3/8 of an inch in from the edge because that was the seam allowance I put in. And make sure and turn a nice corner down at the bottom so that make sure to turn a nice corner down at the center front so that we have a nice crisp line to work with. Next, we're going to clip our center front corner and clip our curve. Before we flip it in, we're going to get an iron out again and press it open. This will ensure that you get a really nice crisp look for your facing. So we're just going to press open that seam and then we're going to flip it to the inside and press it again really well. If you prep everything really well, when you cover stitch the top, you don't need to use nearly as many pins, causing any problems. So then we're going to move over to the cover stitch machine, and we're just going to sew all the way around. Now I have a guideline penned out for myself on the cover stitch machine, so I'll make sure I'll always stay that far away and it'll look very clean. And then when I turn, I want to make sure that I'm not pulling my threads too much, and I just did just a little bit. But you want to get that as crisp as possible to get as much of a corner as possible. I pulled mine a little bit too much, so you can see it's a little wonky right there, but that's okay. Final step I'm going to do is I'm going to trim away everything that is extra in that facing and give it one last look. Look at that. So now it's time to sew up those side seams and sleeve. So I started at the sleeve hem and I stitched up, ensuring that I was lining up that underarm point so that there's nice 4 points and very nice and clean looking. I had a thread break on me and I didn't realize it, and it was pulling and not fully tight. So I had to rethread that and then get serging again. But I got my side seams all serged up and ready to go. And again, I'm going to have to check that because there might be something wonky somewhere that's pulling that so that it's causing it to break. Now it's time to get those hems prepped. So I'm just going to turn all of my hems up by 1 inch. So I'm using a seam gauge and pins, pinning it to where I want it to be, and then I'm giving it a really good press. And then I'm going to do the same on the other sleeve. Go around and measure, pin and press. And then finally on the hem. So I'm going to start by putting a pin in the center back and in the side seam, and then I'm going to work my way in between those 2 pins. I'm going to do this because I do have a little bit of a curve, so it's to make sure that it's curving the way I want it to be and all the fabric settling into where I want to be. There's going to be a little bit of ease in some places and a little bit of stretch in other places. And I just want to make sure that it looks good in the end. So pin and then press it really good. And then right before I actually do any of those hems, I take the pins out right before I do it, leaving the pins in the rest of the places. And then I just cover stitched around the edge of the sleeve, moved on to the next sleeve, took out the pins, did another stitch all the way around, and finally did my hem, took out all those pins and cover stitched around. And then finally, it is time to try on this new shirt dress. I am so excited. Look at that. And voila, we have a t-shirt dress. I am super, super happy with how this turned out, and I'm excited for you to be making your own t-shirt dress. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe so you can see other fun ways to digitally apparel pattern. If you missed how to draft this pattern, you can definitely go check that video out. And I look forward to seeing you in some of my other videos. Happy patterning!